does a modern, cultured nation just fall apart? How does it descend into utter barbarism, and how does the world even begin to pick up the pieces and find some kind of justice? Well, today, we're tracing that exact story. This is the path to Nuremberg.
Think about this for a second. After World War II, this was the question facing the Allies. The scale of what the Nazis had done was so enormous, so methodical, that the existing laws just didn't cover it. They were literally trying to prosecute something called crimes against humanity, before that term even had a real solid legal meaning.
So, where do you hold a trial for the soul of a nation? They chose here, Nuremberg, Germany, a city in absolute ruins. And the irony is, this was the very same city that had once hosted the Nazi Party's massive theatrical propaganda rallies. It's here that the final reckoning was about to begin.
And let's be clear, this wasn't just about putting a few bad guys in the dock. This was the world trying to put the very idea of state-sponsored terror on trial. It had never been done before. This was, in every sense, a trial for humanity itself.
The four Allied powers, that's the US, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and France, they basically had to write a new rule book. They came up with 4 totally groundbreaking charges. You had your traditional war crimes, sure, but then there was conspiring to commit those crimes, waging an aggressive war in the first place, and this brand new concept, crimes against humanity, which was aimed squarely at the persecution of civilians.
The trial is an incredible story on its own, but the question that it forces us to ask is even bigger. How? How did a country like Germany get to this point? To even start to answer that, we have to rewind the clock, back to the end of another world war.
Okay, so our story really kicks off with the birth of Germany's first ever democracy, the Weimar Republic. It was born right out of the ashes of World War I, and honestly, it was fragile from day one. It was just haunted by defeat, political chaos, and economic disaster.
And when I say fragile, I mean it. The new republic just staggered from one crisis to another. It was like a series of body blows. First, the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. Then, a few years later, a complete economic meltdown with hyperinflation. And just when it seemed like things were sort of getting stable, boom. The Great Depression hits the whole world, and Germany is plunged right back into misery.
You really can't overstate how crushing the Treaty of Versailles was. It wasn't just the insane amount of money they had to pay back. It was this war guilt clause, which basically forced Germany to take all the blame for the war. That created this deep, burning sense of national shame. And on top of that, they lost huge chunks of industrial land, crippling their ability to rebuild.
Then came the hyperinflation of 1923. I mean, this is the stuff of nightmares. To stop the economy from collapsing, the government just printed more and more money until the money itself became worthless. Your entire life savings could be wiped out, just like that. Just try to imagine the sheer panic of living in a society where you need a wheelbarrow full of cash just to buy some bread.
And if you want a number that just breaks your brain, here it is. By August of 1923, it took over 4.6 million German marks to equal a single US dollar. The entire economic bedrock of the country had just turned to dust. And with it went any trust people had in their new democratic government. So you have this perfect storm, right? Humiliation, economic chaos, political instability, and walking right into the middle of it, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. And they came with very simple answers and a very convenient scapegoat for all of Germany's problems.
The Great Depression was the fuel for their fire. Just look at these numbers. It's unbelievable. In 1928, before the stock market crash, the Nazis were a joke, a tiny fringe party with less than 3% of the vote. 4 years later, with millions out of work, they were the single largest political party in Germany.
So how did they do it? They sold a story, a powerful, seductive story to people who were absolutely desperate to hear it. Hitler promised to restore German dignity, to tear up the Versailles Treaty, to give everyone a job, to make Germany strong again. It was exactly what a broken nation wanted to believe. And once Hitler got his foot in the door as chancellor, the speed at which he dismantled democracy is just breathtaking and terrifying. Within 2 months, there's a mysterious fire at the Parliament building. Hitler uses it as the perfect excuse to issue the fire decree, which basically suspends all civil rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, all of it. A month after that, the Enabling Act gives him the power to rule as a dictator. Democracy was dead.
So, with democracy gone, the Nazi Party could finally put its horrific ideology into practice. They began building a state,
a machinery of terror that the world had truly never seen before.
You know, it was this chilling bait and switch. You look at what the Nazis promised versus what they actually delivered. The promise of a strong nation became the reality of total state control. The promise of security was enforced by the Gestapo, the secret police who could arrest and imprison you without a trial. And the promise of national dignity was achieved by systematically getting rid of anyone they considered an undesirable.
And a huge part of their plan was this idea they called Lebensraum. It literally translates to living space. This was the core belief that the so-called superior German race needed to expand eastward, conquering other nations to steal their land and resources. It was the excuse they needed to justify a brutal war of aggression.
And this is where it gets really, really sinister, the language they used. In their own official documents, they used these code words, these euphemisms to hide what they were doing. Mass murder and execution were referred to as special treatment. The gas chambers were called disinfection areas. It was a cold, calculated effort to make the unthinkable sound mundane.
And the result of all this? Genocide on a scale that is still to this day hard to fully comprehend. 6 million Jewish people were systematically murdered. But the Nazi killing machine also targeted millions of others: Polish civilians, gypsies, disabled Germans, and so many more.
Which brings us right back to where we started, back to that courtroom in Nuremberg. Because after witnessing the absolute depth of this horror, the world had to respond. The trial wasn't just about revenge, it was about trying to build a legacy, a firewall of justice to prevent this from ever happening again.
The trial itself went on for months. In the end, the verdicts came down. 12 of the top Nazi leaders were sentenced to death. That included Hermann Göring, the highest-ranking Nazi there. He actually managed to cheat the hangman by committing suicide just hours before his execution. 7 others got prison sentences, and controversially, 3 were acquitted.
But honestly, the individual sentences weren't even the most important thing to come out of Nuremberg. It was these 2 world-changing legal principles that were established. 1. Individuals can be held personally responsible for crimes against international law. You can't just hide behind the state. And 2, I was just following orders is not a defense. These 2 ideas became the bedrock of all modern international law.
And so we're left with this one last, really unsettling thought. A German pastor and resistance fighter named Niemöller later wrote about the uncanny silence from ordinary Germans as all these terrible things were happening. People were afraid. They were afraid to speak up, afraid to protest, afraid to be different. And it leaves us with the question that Nuremberg poses to every single generation since. What is the danger of silence?